Lucas. I think you're going to start, Lucas, but welcome the team from SportEng and really appreciate them leading our discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and good morning to everyone. It is a topical discussion, and I guess it's one that over my time here as a thinking back to my junior football and cricketing days, waterlogged fields have been a part of the community sport landscape for a very long time. So it's not a new issue. However, I guess it's an issue and a challenging set of circumstances in which is ever evolving, and we, like we will today, we're really keen to share and learn and understand how we can improve and evolve our approaches to ensure that we continue to do better in this space. And obviously, the name of the game is to unlock capacity, playing time, and playing conditions. So our team is going to, I guess, shine a light on some of the aspects that we think are most important through our various experiences. Between Jonathan and myself, we've worked across local government. We've been on the construction side, the maintenance side, and then consultancy and research. So I would also like, on behalf of SportEng, to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we all meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend that to respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. So let's get into it. John Nayland's going to talk us through understand some of the agronomic issues to set the scene for, then we'll talk about some of the approaches, both proactive and reactive, in terms of managing waterlogged fields, and then we'll quickly talk about what's next, and hopefully that'll provide ample time to be able to open up for some discussion and questions from the floor. So over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucas, and thank you for taking some time out of your days to have a chat with us. It's always an interesting sort of topic, I suppose, about this time of the year. I'm talking to sort of friends that know that I'm in the turf industry, but I don't know exactly what I do. They do wonder whether this time of the year is busier than others. I think this year's probably been a little bit more extraordinary than maybe some other winters that we've had, and it really starts to highlight any deficiencies that we have in our fields, whether it be by construction or by our maintenance techniques. So, why is the playing surface staying wet? It's fairly basic. In my sort of 40-odd years in the turf industry, I've probably seen every form of poor construction and poor maintenance as possible. We did a research project a few years back where we had a number of fields of different construction type, and it was interesting that the field that was the best built and had the best drainage performed the best, as you might expect through a wet winter, but interestingly it also had the worst maintenance regime. So we need to tie the two things together. We can't construct something really well and not have a maintenance regime that's going to complement that type of construction. So the issues that we commonly see: poor soil permeability. We just don't have infiltration rate or drainage of the fields. So we tend to find that the moisture is sitting in the surface, which is where all the problems are going to precipitate from once you start to get wear on it. The accumulation of thatch or organic matter. That's an ongoing problem. It's something that tends to be somewhat neglected. And even on the best built fields, if we have this wad of organic matter sitting in the surface, it's going to hold water like a sponge, and the water won't infiltrate through. So again, we're holding water, high traffic, and then we get a lot of turf damage as a result. Soil compaction. Again, we need to be attending to that. Even on well-built fields, the soils will compact over time, and we need to have techniques in place to alleviate that compaction. Uneven surface levels, it's an interesting one. A colleague of mine was just doing some assessment of some fields, and he sent me a photo of the worst parts of the ground on a sand-based field, relatively new, but the surface levels were poor, these localised depressions that were holding water. And again, traffic through those ponded areas is going to cause damage. Inadequate soil aeration. I know that every council, every maintenance team are under budgetary and time constraints, but there's a minimum amount of maintenance that's required, and particularly attending to some of the soil physical issues. All right, so we can have all sorts of fancy fertilisers and do all those sort of things, but we do need to be physically working the soil to make sure that we maintain adequate permeability. And then, of course, wet weather. You know, that's obvious, isn't it? But I was having a look at some statistics. I've been doing some work up in Sydney in recent times, and at a golf club that's going through a reconstruction, and I was told they'd had 1,200 millimetres of rainfall up until the start of this month or the middle of this month, with the long-term average being somewhere between sort of 800 and 1,000 millimetres. Similarly, when I had a look at the Bureau of Meteorology information for Sydney Airport, there's already been a bit over 1,000 millimetres for the year versus the long-term average of 1,096. And that May and June period, there's 500 millimetres of rain. So the rainfall events have been pretty intense. There's been a lot of moisture. There was a lot of moisture probably even off the back of the summer months with some of those high rainfall events. So soils are going into the winter period at a relatively high moisture content, so it doesn't take much more rain to top that up and to end up with a wet playing surface. So hopefully that. Can you switch that over for me, Lucas? Thank you. Next slide. Thank you. We hear a lot about climate change. I'd like to talk about, you know, maintaining turf in a changing climate. But there are some significant issues that are coming up, and from my observations, particularly up and down the east coast of Australia, we're starting to see more stresses on turf grasses because of direct stress on the plant, but also other interactions around soils and drainage. We're seeing some changing growth patterns. Things are very localised from a climate point of view as well. Now, it's always been a challenge in its own right in maintaining sports fields, but these variations can be very localised, and we need to be aware of that. I think this last year we were expecting an El Nino summer that was going to provide a lot of heat and be very dry. That really didn't sort of come to the fore, but it's interesting when you read through the information from the Bureau of Meteorology. They talk about these high rainfall events being part of that El Nino pattern. And we certainly experienced that up and down the East Coast. And I think over the last 2 years, we've done a number of little webinars, seminars about flooding and wet fields and how we can restore them. So if this looks like the future, we've not only got to have fields that we're going to be able to manage from a heat and drought point of view, but also fields that are also going to have to deal with high intensive rainfall events as well. So there's a few challenges ahead of us, and I think we need to do a little bit more planning around that space. Thanks, Lucas. So winter sports equals turf damage. Again, stating the bleeding obvious, across the summer months and in the research that we've done, the summer months is the best time to be just growing grass and setting the turf up for the high wear of, you know, soccer and rugby and Australian rules football during that winter period. So that's when most of our damage occurs. Training activities, very much localised patterns of training. I think our stocking rates are probably beyond the capability of many of our fields. So if we have wet soil conditions, the damage is certainly going to be accelerated. With most municipal sports fields, they're used most days of the week. And it's sort of interesting comparing, say, New South Wales, where we see a lot of closures of sports fields, compared to Victoria, where they could be playing in a swamp, and that ground's probably still not going to be closed for play. The point that I really want to emphasise here is that late summer management is a key to surviving the winter. So while I think this discussion today is good, we probably need to come back in maybe about 5 or 6 months' time and start to think about what are the strategies we're going to put in on the back of the summer months, so that we can better or have fields that they're going to cope better with potentially wet weather over the winter. Thanks, Lucas. So what's happening with traffic and wet soils? So as soils become wet and silt and clay particles start to clog the pore spaces. So that's the problem. We're almost getting these fine soil particles sort of floating around within the pore space, and they tend to lodge in the larger pore spaces, which we rely on for infiltration and drainage. And then the result of that is that the infiltration rates slow down and drainage slows down. So as they become saturated and muddy, we then start getting problems with the turf becoming coated with fine soil particles and partially buried. And that starts to accelerate the turf damage because often the weather's cool, so the growth and recovery is compromised already, let alone having this layer of silt and clay sitting over the top of it. Then once we start to play on those wet and muddy soils, it starts to accelerate the turf damage. So the picture of that wonderful field there, that was one in our trials. That was perfect when the weather was dry. One weekend, 40 millimetres of rain, 5 games of junior football, and that's the end product. So for all those reasons, that field has just recently been reconstructed. So again, we see the fine soil particles coming to the surface, sealing the surface, all the infiltration rate and drainage is lost, and that's the end product. So we end up with a lot of turf damage and a very poor quality playing surface. Thanks, Lucas. So from a turf physiology point of view, I suppose one important thing about, the winter sports, if we're playing on couch grass and kikuyu, they're going to be semi-dormant. So maybe some of the physiological impacts on root systems and that may not be quite as severe, but things that we need to think about, if we've got wet soils, if we've got saturated soils, we have very little oxygen within the profile. That has a dramatic effect on root growth and root health. We also get the formation of toxic compounds like hydrogen sulfide, or what we might call black layer, and you can see that black layer in that photo there. That's highly toxic to plant roots, so we're going to get root dieback. We get build-up of carbon dioxide because the roots will be respiring, particularly in that sort of late summer, early autumn, early winter period, if there's still some growth and activity taking place. So again, carbon dioxide build-up, if that can't get out of the profile, we're again going to have toxic compounds developing that are going to damage the root systems. So as the root system is compromised and the turf drops off in health, the wear tolerance decreases as well. So the recuperative capacity becomes less and less. So the damage gets worse and worse as we move through the winter months. So again, if we've got wet conditions and we're damaging the plant and there's no ability for it to recover, that deterioration is going to be accelerated. Thanks, Lucas. So again, wet soils are very susceptible to compaction. We're getting fine soil particles tend to almost sort of puddle up to the surface and seal the surface. So we have this inhibition of root growth and root health, particularly as we start to come into that spring period when particularly the warm season grasses start to grow again, which is a time when we really want maximum root growth and root health, taking us into the summer months when we might be subjected to sort of warm or hot and dry conditions, when we need our root systems to be at their maximum depth and density. What it also does is increases thatch organic matter accumulation, and on that slide on the left-hand side, you can see that mucky black layer. That top component there is all organic matter accumulation. So that's holding all the water, and that's sitting over quite a good quality sand profile. So we've got a number of things that are working against us in that particular situation. Poor root growth, we've got black layer, we're holding a lot of moisture at the surface. So again, turf deterioration is going to be accelerated. And also, as the root system is compromised, we're going to have issues with nutrient uptake as well. And we can get all sorts of imbalances from a nutritional point of view. Thanks, Lucas. Excuse me. So this is just a very simple example. I mean, the field on the right-hand side is not the best constructed field in the world, but it's got a reasonably sandy profile. It had sort of infiltration rates of about 40 to 50 millimetres an hour for most of the year. So it had the capacity to take moisture reasonably well. So we were comfortably getting our 23 to 25 hours of use a week on that field. The one on the left, as I explained before, all that damage occurred in one weekend, and it was getting or coping with about 12 to 16 hours of use a week, but in reality, it probably should have been closed. I mean, it was just a swamp until we got into the spring-summer period when the soil started to dry out. So I'm very much a proponent of maintaining dry surfaces, and dry surfaces certainly increases the wear tolerance. So you don't get any of that unnecessary deterioration in the turf. It's in a better growing environment, so the wearability is greatly improved as well. So again, I tend to go towards drainage, good permeability of soils to make sure that we can optimise our wear or maximise our wear without too much turf deterioration and having to close fields down. Thanks, Lucas. So just the last little bit here, agronomic implications of wet sports fields. So it's the increase in turf damage and turf replacement. I mean, the cost of replacement turf now is quite quite high. What we tend to find too, we see a lot of turf replaced, and sometimes those fields are reopened for play before the turf has really had a good chance to establish. So that damage tends to be sort of compounded over time. We have slow recovery in the spring, so we see a lot of extra disease and insect activity in turf that's been subjected to high levels of wear. So in that recovery process, it's again compromised because the diseases and insects are eating away at the new growth, and then the turf is very slow to recover. Root damage, so their ability to tolerate droughty conditions or hot conditions during the summer is compromised. Overall, greater repairs. And what we do tend to see too, and again, it's one of these things where we can build quite a good field. The maintenance program really isn't sufficiently good enough. So we have damage, we get some repair over the summer months, but it's still weakened turf, and then that's damaged again the following winter, so that damage tends to be compounded over successive seasons. So again, there's a number of things we just need to be aware of, and the timing of our activities. So the spring becomes really critical to get the turf recovery, looking at our fertility, our pest control, working through the summer months, and then that late summer really concentrating on getting a really high density turf, doing our subsoil aeration, and then leading into the winter months. That might be just about it for me. I'm not sure if there's another slide. Is there, Lucas, for me?
No, John, that's you done. So thank you for I guess setting the scene for us in terms of the agronomics of natural turf fields of play, and some of the the internal workings and the chemistry and the science of natural turf, and I guess in these circumstances how the fields are being affected, and what's happening at that level, right in amongst the turf plant, and ultimately, our priority in turf grass management is to maintain a healthy crop. It all starts and finishes at that point, which is a good segue, I guess, into our next section, which is just going to, I guess, shine a light on some of the aspects in terms of intervention that we can take both now in the immediate term, also in the short to long, medium and longer term as well. And Jonathan Douglas is going to jump into the presentation now and talk about, following on from John's I guess, key point around taking action and at the right time and being proactive. There are both preventative and also reactive and recovery maintenance techniques. And Jonathan Douglas, through his time as a golf course superintendent and also construction supervisor with Evergreen Turf, has experienced firsthand the challenges of having to manage turf which is being challenged by both the environment and the users. So, Jonathan, I'll hand to you, and you can take us through the next section.
Thank you, Lucas. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Lucas indicated, I'm just going to piggyback on what John's been discussing on controlling of the playing surface. I'm going to briefly talk about scarification, aeration, turf wickets, and drainage assets. The image on the right is actually a golf course green, a golf green that I used to maintain and manage a few years ago. During the period, this golf green was maintained at the elite level, and then during budget cuts and restraints, then only reactive maintenance was delivered. As you can see, because all the good work had been done over the years, basically when it came into reactive maintenance, it was just lacking aeration, as John indicated, just penetrating infiltration rates into the surface. And you can see clearly on the right-hand side where the vertidrain or microtine, as we used, had gone through the golf green, and infiltration rate was immediate. On the left is still surface water, and a little bit of probably surface damage was going to develop. But just to repeat, because the maintenance practices over the years were at the elite level, the reactive maintenance was quickly into recovery mode straight away. So playability was accessed. Next slide, please, Lucas. Going into scarification, scarification, as John indicated, is a process of removing thatch and dead and decaying leaf matter that stays stagnant in the playing surface and the just along the crown area of the grass plant. These practices need to be kind of preventative and proactive during the growing season, leading into the later summer months, leading again into the winter months. So if the whole canopy is being cleaned out and maintained, then the health of the plant is increased, and the infiltration rate and permeability rates of the surface is predominantly achievable going into the winter months. It's not saying it's going to minimize waterlogging for argument's sake, but it will diffuse it slightly. Next slide, please, Lucas. Aeration again, as John indicated, compaction rates of any kind of sports facility will increase throughout the year. Vertidraining, which is the picture on the left hand side, is quite aggressive. It can be delivered more into more compact soil profiles, where this machine can be tilted and set to a pitch where it can be aggressively punch into the surface and shatter the profile of the ground. So it's more of an aggressive approach. The aeration equipment on the right hand side is a drum spiking unit, which is not as aggressive. So it's generally used as a reactive maintenance. So it penetrates just slight aeration into the profile and relieves surface tension. So it could be classed as a reactive. These two aeration can be preventative throughout the whole year. So you kind of got to adapt to the climatic change that's coming in the forthcoming months. So if you know you're going to have heavy rain, then it's recommended that any form of aeration is recommended going into the wet season, as we can say. Next slide, please, Lucas. Cricket wickets. This is actually an AFL field, and it's AFL season, which is going into the winter months. It is always advised if there's a cricket square in the middle that you actually protect the cricket square in the winter months. Granted, there's no play being used, but if it's covered and protected for the upcoming cricket season and for the initial winter sports that are being played, then it will minimise the wetness and damage occurred during the AFL season, we'll say. So it's always recommended when you can protect a facility, protect it if the resources are there. Next slide, please, Lucas. I'll briefly touch drainage assets. A lot of people assume the drainage is in place and the drainage will work without any maintenance. That's not always the case. On the left-hand side, this is an old swell drain where they'd had damage from the head wall. So an upfront cost of just replacing the head wall to help the flow of the surface water to get to the outlets and to the full stormwater drainage, which this was a great example of just a minor cost to repair the swell drain to continue the flow. On the right-hand side, it's a surface runoff, a spoon drain. There's a bit of reactive maintenance occurred here where they've left the asset overgrown, so they've actually come in and sprayed it with Roundup, and the very next day they were going to actually remove all this debris, so the asset will be achievable again going into the winter months. So that's kind of a reactive response to cleaning out the drainage assets. But it is highly recommended that all these facilities are constantly maintained throughout the year. These two images are for surface runoff, but you can adapt these approaches for subsoil, for your outlets, that they basically fix assets and maintain these assets going forward. Thank you, Lucas.
All right, Jonathan. Thanks for your insights into some of the proactive and reactive maintenance activities, which can definitely assist. And I think obviously we've got only an hour, and we'd like to definitely have plenty of time for discussion. So we are. We acknowledge that we're very much just skimming the surface on particular issues, but I'd reiterate that if there's particular questions or circumstances or situations that you'd like to talk about, please use the chat to pose those questions, and we'll circle back towards the end. I guess while John and Jonathan have talked very much about the agronomy and then the maintenance side of things, I'd like to now cover off on the planning and management side of the equation. As both have alluded to, it's important to ensure for natural turf fields that the right level of maintenance and resources are provided to ensure that the turf plant can live and exist in an environment in which it's going to be able to withstand the rigors of the climatic conditions, but also the usage. And we know, and I know firsthand from my time as a local government manager of a horticulture services department, that in the local government space, and I appreciate also in the education space, the battle for resources is very highly contested. And therefore it is really important, from a turf management perspective and the sports turf industry, is that we are competing and preparing our business cases with the best available information, and really relying on the science and the data that we can extract from our turf managers and curators, but also from our clubs and our user groups, which can help justify and strengthen the argument for resources to be directed accordingly. So I'm just going to talk quickly, overview strategic asset management, turf management planning, and then shared use agreements as three aspects that are I've found to be important and have a significant influence on the ability to provide adequate natural turf surfaces. So for those of you, and I understand many of the audience are local government based, but if for those that may be from an education setting or from a sporting association or from one of our peak bodies, obviously the principles apply in that it's really important depending on which setting you're in. But if we'll talk about use local government as the case study today, is that sports fields provide the many recreational benefits, and most of the time in all settings there is a demand or a link to health and well-being that is the first and foremost for our open spaces. They also provide a lot of biodiversity and environmental benefits. However, it's really important in your setting and in your location to understand, how does your sports fields and the services they provide, how they align to your organisational vision and priorities. It can't be assumed, and I guess in my own experience across 10 years in local government, that was 2.5, 4-year terms, was that the priorities did change. The vision and the priorities and where council wanted the funding and the both the capital funding and operational funding, where that needed or was prioritised, did change, and therefore we had to adapt and adjust and move with those changes. And I think that the key documents and such as a council plan is a really good starting point to understand, well, where is your council heading? What is the plan of attack? Secondary to that is the policies. Do you have policies which are related to the provision of sport and the management and maintenance of sports fields? For example, there are policies which may talk to the usage of fields. There's policies which may talk to the level of provision, the level of infrastructure which will be provided based on the level of sport or the type of sport that is played. These guiding documents are really critical to understand in terms of your own situation around, well, what is achievable, what is our mandate here, and what can we do, and what resources then do we have to be able to implement. Strategies and plans, as I mentioned, and John and Jonathan have mentioned, provision of maintenance is critically important. So being able to understand that your organisation has a level of funding and resource allocation and how that needs to then be apportioned. Most municipalities will have upwards of 10 to 30 to 50 to 70 or plus fields, and your allocation of funding needs to be allocated across that. It's one of the most challenging aspects, I believe, in turf management that I've come across, in being able to, whether it be in a golf course setting or in a local government setting, is being able to take a bucket of allocated funding and resources, and then trying to work out how to share that across the portfolio of fields, noting that in every situation there's so much uniqueness to all of the maintenance requirements, and it's a really challenging task to be able to then apportion that correctly, but also then have the flexibility to move resources and be able to move with the climatic changes or maybe usage changes. All of these, I guess the key benefits of having and understanding your policy, strategies, plans, and even council plans is that there's an ability to engage with your key stakeholders and develop and build shared understanding. I've found in my experience, especially early on, that there was a lot of misunderstanding amongst, especially at club level, around what council did and didn't do and how it did it and didn't do it. And therefore, being able to really use these guiding documents and the documents which council have endorsed and adopted and set out your funding priorities and service priorities, bringing the key stakeholders into the tent, so to speak, and really sharing the clear understanding. What I found that does is it allows all parties to focus their energy and effort towards those agreed outcomes. And I'm sure I'll have experience where there's a push and pull effect, and there's many all the clubs and different stakeholders are heading in different directions. And I think it is, and as John alluded to, I think that the challenges are only going to become more and more complex if they're not already complex enough. And therefore, utilising your strategic documents and planning it and really getting on the front foot with your engagement to build understanding and educate along the way is a critical part in terms of, I guess, laying the foundations for success, so that when things, and we've seen it recently, when conditions do become unfavourable, there'll be better understanding as to why that's occurred and what are the options that we can take. And I guess from a really practical sense, Jonathan mentioned the need to scarify and aerate. That sometimes there's pushback against those activities because they're seen to be disruptive to scheduling and disruptive to, say, finals or the crossover between seasons and codes. However, with better understanding around the benefits and the purpose of those activities, I'd like to think that we can create time and space in the schedule to be able to complete those, because if we don't complete those, we end up chasing our tails. Which I guess is a segue into this next section around turf management planning. So from my perspective, one of the things I learned, within the first few months and then early years was, from my mentors, was the natural turf grass lives and breathes 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There are no days off. And I've definitely lived and breathed this, where I, have had to be on site, on Christmas Day, public holidays, Monday to Sunday, whether we like it or not, and whether we acknowledge it or not, there is an element to managing turf and natural turf fields which does require our planning and our resources and our activity to recognise that it's a living, breathing entity, and Mother Nature and the climate and environmental conditions are also not going to recognise public holidays and weekends and school holidays, etc. So our planning and our approach needs to recognise that. And I'm not saying that we need to shift all of our shifts onto a Saturday or a Sunday or Christmas holidays, but I think it's just a recognition that turf management needs to be a 365, 24-hour a day pursuit, and that our planning and our strategic documents and our resourcing is allocated and understood in that way. Again, it's a really important piece to this is the communication of those plans. So if we develop that annual plan of maintenance activities, and we've scheduled in scarification, aeration of our field, and there is going to be some disruption, access on the day of those works, that'll affect club training. It may affect a dog user group. If we can communicate a plan of attack and the reasons why, in 9 times out of 10, you may not be able to please everyone, but we're definitely going to be able to keep everyone informed. And for the large majority, people will start to see the benefits on the field, and through that, we'll build trust and confidence. in the approach that's being undertaken. And as we've mentioned before, no two fields are the same. And, even though you may be looking after 70, 80 fields, we still need to have a level of tailoring to each location. And the image on the right here is an example of whereby the turf wicket square has been renovated. All of the square bar one wicket has been top dressed with wicket soil and ryegrass, but we have put in a couch wicket, which is designed then to be used. This is in September. That won't be used until December, probably at the earliest. The rye wickets will be used for the early matches. And then once favourable weather conditions come through, we'll be able to then start working towards the couch grass. This was communicated to the club, to the association, the reasons why and how it will work out in terms of scheduling. And that also influenced how much play and what sort of play was scheduled to this field. Another aspect of planning and management that I've had, I guess, seen to have really positive benefits and influence the ability to manage turf effectively is shared use agreements. And again, they can be used to really acknowledge that the field does require that year-round management by all parties. The image on the right again is a turf wicket circumstance situation with the protective fencing being installed. And the infrastructure that I guess went into this, the planning, noting that this field was a very, very popular dog off-lead area. It was decided by council and the clubs and the dog user group that it was best to use this type of fencing. Therefore, the infrastructure would be installed. And that there would be a need by all parties to assist with the erection and removal of this fence. Now, on the day that I was here following my son's junior cricket, I actually saw the cricket club and members of the dog user group actively helping each other to remove the fence, noting that they understood that there was the schedule for a cricket game was upcoming. And it was really pleasing to see, I guess, that there was acknowledgement from all parties that there was benefits to and the reasons why for this. Jonathan mentioned before about turf wicket covering. Now there's so many benefits again to winter covering or summer in-season covering, and when I think as John alluded to, what we do in summer impacts winter, what we do in winter impacts summer. And I think the best thing that when shared use agreements have the turf management plan and the responsibilities of all parties understood that these things that are done in winter will benefit cricket or benefit football, and vice versa. We aim to and we build towards building that shared and a shared ownership and influence over the condition of the field. And in my experience, it's been a battle, no doubt, and I'm sure all of you have stories where this has been a challenge. But I believe that it's something that we have to persist and really champion and facilitate. Because there's been many, many good examples of great outcomes where fields have gone from needing those repairs on a regular basis, and over time the accumulation of repair has just resulted in the field not performing for either the summer or winter code. And the difference has been a change in terms of shared use agreement around a turf management plan, which recognises the nuance and the uniqueness of the field and its infrastructure. So where to next? It really gets down to having a really clear understanding of what you have and what you're dealing with. So that's from an agronomic perspective, from a maintenance perspective, from a planning and management, use, climate, environment, perspective. If you have a really good understanding of your situation and your conditions, you can then make informed decisions around what to do next and be able to allocate and utilize those resources that you may have at your disposal. And especially when you're managing multiple fields and multiple sports, then the more data and the more evidence that you have to inform those decisions and then be able to communicate those decisions, it will be, I guess, go towards building better understanding and better confidence amongst the stakeholder groups, and be able to inform their decision making too. If you're able to clearly articulate that the field may have limitations, that may influence the club, which may have had plans to increase their number of teams or move into a different competition. That may temper their plans and I guess initiate conversations to council around, well, we'd like to do this, however, we understand there are limitations. So how can we work together to I guess, achieve that goal? There are definitely immediate, short-term and immediate things to be able to do, and we've talked about a few of those today. There's never a bad time to take action. And I think with turf, there are times when we have to act and act immediately. And then there are other times where we can schedule activities in for a break in the schedule or before a change in the season. And then long-term strategy, I guess, around understanding, that the priority of the field and sports fields within your municipality or if it's a school, and being able to understand, well, if your need is to increase your level of use and level of play, and you do have limitations, agronomic limitations, then developing the business case to be able to address that and do that in a respectful, I guess, way, rather than just sort of, I guess, being turning up in front of the executive management team or council and having to be very reactive and asking for what, in most cases, can be large sums of money, and also, can be quite disruptive to the local community. We need to come up with, I believe, 4-year to 10-year asset management plans, which clearly articulate the plan of attack to be able to address your fields of play, also, but working within the allocations that are available. So with that is brings us to a conclusion of our presentation. We would now like to, and Mark, I can throw back to you to facilitate discussion. I'm not sure whether there's been any activity in the chat, but
let's Q&A. I think some people get access. I can't access the chat for some reason, but there's definitely the Q&A. So if there's a particular questions, we'll go through some here. If you've got a couple of questions now, and then we can certainly share.
Do you want me to answer that hour of use one?
Yeah, we can start off with. So we've got one from. Sorry, let's go back to the Q&A. So I might start with Patrina was talking about what does an hour of use look like? How many players?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's been a lot of arguments and discussions about it, but I suppose the rule that I tend to use is that we look at an hour of use with adult players with about sort of 40 participants. Now, you can sort of play with those numbers a bit. There's been some stuff that was done for the PLA quite a few years ago where they look at the impact of junior players, sort of middle-aged players and senior players in terms of hours of use. But if I said an hour of use, I'd be expecting it to be adult players and around about 40 participants as a rough rule of thumb.
That's good. Thanks, John. And Carl, I think, asked the first question was about, I showed a few turf wickets. Obviously, they seem to bear the brunt of, particularly when it's wet. So he was talking about, let me just get the question there around the turfs, better managing of turf wicket tables through winter use, and is there any techniques or solutions there we can think about? We showed a few.
Yeah, covers are the key. but there tends to be a lot of pushback because of the delineation between the football type activities, whether it be soccer, rugby, or AFL, and cricket, and dragging those covers on and off. There's a bit of a kerfuffle here in Victoria actually on the weekend for the women's football grand final around who should be covering the wicket and who should be uncovering it, and there was a sort of a triangular argument between council, football club, cricket, and the VFL. But covering the wicket is key, and I think whenever you get an opportunity to roll the wicket to flatten out any minor undulations is really important, because I've had my son play in junior footy where the opposite occurs. The cricket wicket will be churned up during a wet period. If nobody rolls that out and the wicket dries off, you end up with a lot of very sort of sharp, quite dangerous sort of fractures and humps and bumps within that wicket table. So covering is key, and doing some rolling as well.
I might add there too, John, in terms of the turf wickets is, I think in my experience, the ability to maintain a grass coverage is, and again, having that shared understanding and ownership between the codes and the user groups of the field, it not only benefits or benefits both codes. You know, cricket wickets will be better, and better conditions will perform better with a grass coverage as opposed to having very sparse and thin grass coverage, and we're essentially just rolling the cricket wicket soil with some grass clippings. And similarly in the winter season, it provides that level of cushioning and protection, I guess, against the hardness, and so that the players aren't necessarily they've got something to get, I guess, anchor into, and as John mentioned, you know, it doesn't get all gnarly and rough and ready, which really detracts from the play, especially at the junior level when kids are trying to trudge their way through that heavy wicket clay, which has got holding a lot of water. So I think, you know, the principle around turf health and condition cannot be understated enough, and that our focus really needs to be around that in all settings, and how we can achieve that. Because once the turf is lost, we then really have significant issues and challenges to be able to provide good playing surfaces.
Good point. Lawrence Curdy had a few questions about soil moisture probes and remote sensing. So is there some tech we can use there to keep an eye on our soil moisture levels?
There's certainly tech there. It's a will to use it that's the problem. In my nearly 40 years of sort of research and education and consulting, I've done a lot of work with soil moisture probes. We do have some reasonably good remote telemetry that can help, certainly from an irrigation point of view, and watering to the best benefit of turf grass. So that's sort of helping with sort of water conservation, water saving, and also optimising turf growth. I suppose from a winter management point of view, I've actually had that discussion previously about, okay, can we set a benchmark at which point in time we don't want to use that field for training or for match play. You might be able to set some moisture levels, but I think it's going to be obvious to the eyes for starters that it's probably saturated, and you need to look a little more deeply than that. So sure, it's possibly a monitoring tool that could be used really more for the irrigation season rather than for the winter play.
I can follow on from that a little bit, John. It's a lot of it's like the equipment there and the technology is there. It's the willingness to utilize, like John indicated. Disciplines is a big factor. With the first slide that I showed with the golf green, where we were jumping into reactive maintenance, where the half the green was slowly going into a full saturation, field capacity, waterlogging scenario. I actually knew that was going to happen the week before, because I was doing soil moisture probing, checking the field capacity of the golf greens throughout the whole week. So I'd preempted what I was going to do when it fully hit waterlogged saturation levels. So it's discipline that a lot of people misinterpret as it's lacking, where the technology is there, the turf management practices are in place, but are you actually doing the practices? Is the discipline there? The motivation, the willingness to get that, it was a golf green for argument's sake, but to get that field into play, knowing the technology is available and the willingness and the reactiveness is there. So it's a lot of it to me is discipline as well.
Mark, I can probably jump in and talk to the Lawrence's question around building an argument to resource turf management, and I probably that links back to my section around understanding, especially if this is in a local government setting. I guess it's understanding the council's priorities around the provision of service for sports turf. So in my experience in local government, I was at a council which didn't have any policy or position around the level of service and the infrastructure that will be provided at the various levels of play that the council was accommodating. So we set out to change that and build and develop a hierarchy, so a level of service related to the infrastructure, and not only the infrastructure, but then the maintenance level. So we were able to work through a process with our clubs, with our associations, and then through our internal departments, which were all affected, and then be able to get the executive to endorse a strategy which outlined that if a venue was providing a regional level sport or a particular type of sport, then the field would be allocated a maintenance regime of A, B, and C, and we had a sliding scale of maintenance levels. So we had an A level maintenance, a B level maintenance, a C level maintenance, and a D level maintenance. And through that process, we were able to basically do a zero-based budgeting exercise and basically build programs for each of those categories. And then I guess the important question that we were asked from council was, well, how do we fund it, and what's this going to cost? And through that budgeting process of building up the program and saying, well, we're going to have 6 fields in the A category, 15 fields in the B, we've got 27 in the C, we can then apportion and allocate our maintenance, which then led to a conversation around our clubs around what is the fees and charges. Fees and charges is an important aspect of the revenue that's generated for council and to deliver its services. And we were able to have the conversation around the level of service provision in relation to the subsidy that was being provided, the fees and charges. So in this particular instance, we were subsidising the maintenance of fields to around about 87-88%. So the clubs were contributing about somewhere around 10 to 12%. And so we're able to have that conversation and really get into the nuts and bolts, and that was able to strengthen our argument. And then over the coming years, we were able to put in budget bids and funding and be really competitive against our friends over in the early learning and other areas of council who were also trying to get more funds. But our budget bids were then based on this hierarchy, which had been endorsed by council. And that really gave us the position to be able to then strengthen our argument and be more successful.
That's good. I know we're sort of on time now. There's a few other questions there from Anne and others that may be worthwhile, but maybe we can reach out specifically to, I think Anne's got an issue around the Hawkesbury flooding, wrecking their wickets, etc. So we're happy if the chat should stay open. Alexa will collect those comments, and we can certainly chat a bit a bit further on that. Just mindful of everyone's time. If anyone wants to pop any more comments in the chat, we'll Lucas, John, and Jonathan can certainly get back to everyone with some more specific questions for your particular service. I know we're actually here at Liverpool working with SportEng on a couple of design and planning projects, and obviously Jared and the team, the SportEng, are committed to the industry, so they can obviously provide some advice and contacts to your particular solution as well. But I think.
Can I make just a quick suggestion, Mark? Maybe if we collect those questions, and maybe between Lucas and Jonathan and myself, we could just put a little sort of tech note together.
Sounds good.
You could just distribute to everybody, because I'm having a look at some of those questions there, and some of them require a little bit of detail, I think, to try to flesh them out a bit. If people are happy with that.
Yeah, that's good. And then Lawrence, I think you've been asking for the slide deck. Yeah, we'll get a copy of the slides and information to everyone that's online today. Look, really appreciate the webinar, and obviously as our sponsors, SportEng, in terms of assisting us as the broader industry around, making sure our field science is as good as it can be to deal with the wear. I know we talk a lot about synthetics and turf, but still the majority of our fields are all natural turf, and we need to argue for the correct budgets to maintain them, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution as well. But certainly appreciate the team. If you want to keep on adding your chats, or send through an email to Alexa and the PLA office team, we're happy to put in touch a bit of a technical review, and we can do a follow-up chat if anyone's interested. Yes, certainly really appreciate everyone's time, and thank you. We'll go through those chats and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Lucas, John, and Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.